In the fall of 1982, 6 second graders vanished during a school field trip to a Vermont apple orchard. Their teacher was found unconscious near a grove of trees. The orchard was closed. The case went cold, and for over 40 years, the children were never found. But in October 2024, after the orchard's caretaker died, a demolition crew unearthed a buried steel hatch beneath a thicket of collapsed roots. What they found, sealed inside, rewrote everything the investigation thought it knew. Because only 5 names were scratched into the concrete. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe if you love cold case mysteries, disturbing evidence, and true crime thrillers that unravel one chilling layer at a time. October 17th, 2024. Location: Briar Glen Orchard, Windham County, Vermont. The chainsaw stopped mid-cut. For a moment, the only sound in the clearing was the buzz of late-season insects and the creak of tree limbs swaying in the wind. The worker stood frozen over the twisted root system, sweat on his brow, his boot resting on what should have been another gnarled stump. But beneath the dirt and rotted wood was something metal. He knelt, brushed back the soil with gloved hands. Then he shouted for his supervisor. It took 2 men and a pry bar to open the hatch. It groaned as it lifted, revealing a steep, rusted ladder descending into pitch blackness. A flashlight beam caught the edge of something soft and pale resting at the bottom. A mattress, molded, ripped. And next to it, a child's sneaker, small and canvas, stained with something darker than mud. Police sealed off the orchard within the hour. By nightfall, a forensics team in hazmat suits had entered the underground chamber. What they found chilled even the most hardened investigators. Rotted bedding, apple cores with children's teeth marks, wall etchings of days past, small, scratched carvings: Emma, Riley, Sean, Lila, Toby. But there had been 6 children. 6 children had vanished from this orchard in 1982, and only 5 names were etched into the concrete walls. Inside a rusted tin box, beneath a layer of dirt and chewed gum wrappers, they found a cassette labeled Day 1. Mr. Barley says we can't go outside until we stop crying. October 14th, 1982. Location: Briar Glen Elementary, Windham County, Vermont. The sky was that particular shade of pale October blue that only came after the first frost, washed out, cloudless, almost too perfect to last. Miss Corwin stood on the front steps of Briar Glen Elementary, clipboard in hand, trying to maintain order as 23 second graders climbed off the bus in bursts of shrieks and excitement. It was the annual fall field trip to Briar Glen Orchard. Parents brought cider thermoses, teachers brought permission slips, and the children brought noise. 6 of them had broken off already, huddled in a tight cluster near the edge of the gravel path, giggling over something they wouldn't share. They were the advanced readers, as Miss Corwin liked to call them. Bright, precocious, a little too observant for their age. Emma Pritchard, bookish and careful, had been the one to organize the secret club. Sean Mackey, all elbows and scuffed shoes, always brought the jokes. Lila Jensen, with her pink knit gloves and serious eyes, rarely smiled but followed Emma like a shadow. Toby and Riley Foster, twins, one talkative, one silent, both inseparable. And then there was Harper Greer, the quietest of them all. A foster kid, recently moved from Bar. No one knew much about her except that she didn't eat her lunch at school. She only ever smiled when she was climbing something. "Stay where I can see you," Miss Corwin shouted, though the words blew away on the breeze. Her voice had the permanent rasp of a woman who taught too long without being listened to. Behind her, the bus driver lit a cigarette. The orchard looked picture-perfect that morning. Rows of trees marched down sloping hillsides, their leaves glowing gold and copper. Red apples hung low, ready for little hands. The caretakers had decorated the front lot with hay bales and wooden crates full of gourds. A scarecrow slumped in one corner beside a weathered sign that read, Briar Glen Orchard. Family owned. Since 1911. Mr. Barley, the caretaker, stood by the entrance with his too wide smile and faded flannel. "Welcome to the orchard, kids," he boomed, voice syrup thick. "No climbing trees, no picking apples without permission, and stay out of the back field. That part's closed for the season." Miss Corwin frowned. "Why's that?" "Ground's unstable," he said simply. "Had some root collapse last week. Wouldn't want anyone twisting an ankle." She nodded, but made a mental note to keep them away from the overgrown section beyond the chicken coop. The children barely heard him. They were already moving, mob-like, toward the picnic tables and rows of apple baskets. Harper hung back. She watched the scarecrow, then the orchard, then Mr. Barley. He was still smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. By noon, the children were spread across the orchard like spilled marbles. Some had gathered at the petting zoo, feeding goats through slats in the fence. Others chased each other through the hay maze. Emma and the other 5, the ones who always seemed to be scheming, had wandered farther, toward the edge of the permitted area. "Let's make it our headquarters," Emma said, pointing to a clearing behind the last visible tree row. "We'll call it the clubhouse." "But we're not supposed to go past the hay barrels," Lila said, glancing back at the orchard. "No one's watching," Sean grinned, already ducking behind the fence post. They moved quickly, low, like soldiers on a mission, carving a path through the tall weeds that bordered the back end of the orchard. Once beyond the final trees, the sound of the field trip faded. Even the wind quieted. What remained was a strange, unnatural stillness. That's when they found it. A half-buried metal hatch, circular, painted green to match the grass, though the paint had long since flaked off. No handle, just a worn iron ring bolted into the center. Emma stepped toward it. "Is that a bomb shelter?" Toby asked, eyes wide. "No," Riley said, voice oddly firm. "It's an old root cellar. My dad says they used to store apples underground before they had refrigerators." "Let's open it," Sean said. But Harper hesitated. "We shouldn't be here," she murmured. Emma had already grabbed the ring and tugged. It moved. They were gone by 2:15. Miss Corwin didn't notice at first. 6 out of 23 wasn't enough to panic her. Not at first. She assumed they were in the bathroom, or maybe sitting beneath the old elm tree where they'd eaten lunch. But by the time the final head count was taken and the bus was ready to leave, the numbers didn't add up. 6 children. Missing. No one had seen them leave. No one had heard anything. And by the time the first cruiser from the Windham County Sheriff's Office pulled into the orchard, the sun was already dipping below the trees. The last thing Miss Corwin remembered, before everything went black, was the scent of apples turning sour. October 14th, 1982. Time, 2:48 p.m. Location, Briar Glen Orchard. Backfield. Deputy Warren Pike arrived on scene 10 minutes after the first call came through dispatch. 6 children unaccounted for during a school field trip, possible abduction. Location, Briar Glen Orchard. He didn't like the orchard. Hadn't since he was a boy himself. Too many places to hide. Too quiet. Too far off the road. He stepped out of the cruiser, adjusted his hat, and met with the orchard caretaker, an older man with a creased forehead and dirt-caked fingernails. "Mr. Barley, is it?" "That's right." The man nodded, arms crossed over his chest. "I was out near the tractor when the teacher started screaming." "And you didn't see anything unusual?" "Nothing," Barley said flatly. "Kids were loud all day, but nothing strange, not till they started looking for the missing ones." Pike noted his lack of concern. "You say you warned them not to go near the back field?" "Absolutely. Even put up fresh rope barriers and signs last week. Ground's soft, lot of erosion. Wouldn't be safe for any child to wander out there." Pike looked past him, toward the rolling hill behind the last row of apple trees. The grass was long and swaying, untouched. Too untouched. He radioed for backup, then walked toward the far fence line where Miss Corwin was now seated on a hay bale, sobbing into a police blanket. He crouched beside her. "Ma'am, can you tell me exactly what happened?" She wiped her face with her sleeve. They were just there. Emma, Sean, the twins, Lila, Harper. They're the good ones. They never caused trouble. I thought they were just at the petting zoo, but when I called roll, they didn't answer. You didn't see anyone suspicious today? No, she shook her head, trembling. But one of the other children, he said he saw them walking near the back of the orchard. Where the rope barrier is. She nodded. I should have been watching. Pike held up a hand. We're going to find them, all right? I've got dogs on the way. Stay here. Don't talk to the other kids just yet. He stood, scanning the orchard. Parents had begun arriving. Some ran to their children. Others stood in silence, pale with terror. The news would spread fast. 6 kids didn't just disappear. Not unless someone made them disappear. The backfield smelled of old leaves and fertilizer. Pike pushed through the barrier and began scanning the ground. Within minutes, another deputy joined him. Got something, the deputy called out. Looks like a path, flattened grass heading toward the north slope. Pike followed, stepping carefully. The grass had been parted recently. He could see sneaker prints, small and scattered, as if the kids had run or been herded. Then they reached the hill's crown. At its base, half swallowed by dirt and vine, was a metal circle. Hatch, Pike muttered. God damn. He dropped to one knee and began brushing off the top. No markings, but it's heavy. Might take a crowbar. Another deputy jogged over with one. It took 3 of them to lift it. The air that escaped was stale, old, not the smell of rot, but something worse. Containment. Isolation. Pike pointed his flashlight down into the darkness. A ladder, rusted but intact. And beyond that, the suggestion of concrete walls and fabric scraps. He drew his weapon. I'm going down. The chamber was 10 feet underground, rough concrete, windowless, colder than the air above. The flashlight swept across a mold-blackened mattress, a dented thermos, and torn bedding in the corners. Someone had lived here, if not recently, then once. But what caught Pike's attention were the etchings on the wall. Crude, scratched by a child's hand. Riley was first. Sean cried all night. We're not allowed to say the name. Beneath these, 5 names were scratched in a child's handwriting. Emma, Riley, Sean, Lila, Toby. There was no Harper. Jesus, Pike whispered. And then he saw the tin box. Inside, a child's sneaker, a corner of a torn class photo, 3 sticks of chewed gum wrapped in foil, a cassette, labeled Day 1. Mr. Barley says we can't go outside until we stop crying. Pike stared up toward the open hatch above. The orchard was now a crime scene. Back at the surface, he emerged pale and grim. Get the dogs, he told the deputy. And call state. We're going to need the bureau. October 15th, 1982. Location: Briar Glen Elementary, Windham County Sheriff's Office, Briar Glen Orchard. The following morning, the school was silent. A notice on the door read, Closed until further notice. Staff in crisis meeting. Inside, the teachers huddled in the lounge, eyes red-rimmed, faces grim. Miss Corwin sat alone in the corner with her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee she hadn't sipped. She hadn't changed clothes. Her voice had gone hoarse overnight from repeating the same 3 phrases to detectives. I don't know how they slipped away. They weren't troublemakers. Harper's name wasn't on the wall. The room smelled of burnt coffee and disbelief. No one said the word dead. Not yet. But everyone was thinking it. At the Windham County Sheriff's Office, an evidence board was already forming. In the center, case number 82-1106, subject, Briar Glen field trip. 6 children missing. Surrounding it, class photo from October 1st, a topographic map of the orchard, a sketch of the underground room, a blown-up image of the cassette label. Pike stood before the board, arms crossed, while the county's lead investigator, Detective Sandra Roan, took notes. "Still no sign of them?" Roan asked. "No," Pike replied. "Dogs picked up a trace near the hatch but lost it 200 yards out. There are no exit prints, and we scanned the storm shelter. It's sealed tight. One entrance, no exits. And the hatch? Industrial grade, welded seams. Could have been installed decades ago. No records." Roan sighed. "And you said 5 names were scratched into the wall?" "Right, but 6 kids went missing. Harper Greer's name wasn't on the concrete." "But she was seen with them?" "Witnesses say she was. She's in the photo too, taken that morning by the orchard staff. It was meant to be a souvenir for parents." He pointed to the image. 6 children in a tight row, arms around each other's shoulders. Harper's eyes stood out, wide, unblinking. "What's on the cassette?" "Still waiting for audio forensics to clean it up, but there's more." Pike flipped to a second photograph, a close-up of the etchings. "Look here. We're not allowed to say the name?" "The kids were afraid of someone. Someone inside that shelter." "Mr. Barley?" Roan asked. Pike shook his head. "He has no criminal history, built like a scarecrow and pushing 70. Doesn't have the strength to drag 6 children. Plus, the shelter's been there for years. Barley's only worked the orchard since 73. But that voice on the tape," Roan said, narrowing her eyes. "If it turns out to be his—" Pike nodded. "Then we're looking at a man who's been hiding something for 9 years. By 2 p.m., the orchard was swarming with investigators. The media had picked up the story overnight. 6 children missing in Vermont orchard. Teacher found unconscious. Police discover underground room. A news van from Burlington parked outside the gate. Reporters yelled over the fence. Barley stood near the farmhouse, face stoic, arms crossed. "I told them not to go out there," he muttered to Pike, who approached again. "I warned them." "You also told us you'd never seen that hatch." "I haven't. It's on your property." "Doesn't mean I knew it was there. That's the back field. Roots run deep out there. People bury all kinds of things in rural towns." Pike studied him. "You still have the staff photo from yesterday?" Barley looked startled, then nodded toward his farmhouse. "Fridge door. Magneted up." They walked together. Inside the dim kitchen, Pike examined the photo. There they were again, 6 children. But something was off. He leaned in. Harper stood at the edge of the group. Her arm wasn't around the others. Her feet were angled away. She was the only one not smiling. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows between 2 apple trees, stood a 7th figure. "Who's that?" Pike asked. Barley leaned in, squinting. I don't know." "It's a man," Pike said, "wearing a jacket. Look, he's standing halfway into the tree line, watching them." Barley said nothing. Roan entered the room behind them. "Just got word. Audio lab recovered the first 20 seconds of the tape." She held out a set of headphones. Pike placed them over his ears. The tape crackled. Then, a child's voice. "Is it morning?" Another child, scared. "Don't talk." He's listening. Then a man's voice. Calm. Measured. "No one's leaving until the crying stops. That's the rule." Pike ripped the headphones off. Roan met his eyes. "Barley's not the only adult we're dealing with." Pike turned back to the fridge, stared at the photo again. 6 missing children, 5 names on the wall. 1 man in the shadows. October 16th, 1982. Location, Windham County, Vermont. The night air pressed down on Windham County like a weighted blanket. Cold, damp, and too quiet for a town still reeling from what had happened at the orchard. Detective Sandra Roan couldn't sleep. She sat alone in her office, the audio cassette on repeat through her headphones. Every time she listened, she heard something new, a whisper in the background, a gasp she hadn't caught before, a creak that didn't belong to any child. This time she focused on the man's voice. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he instructed. No one leaves until the crying stops, that's the rule. If you want food, you earn it. You sit still, you stop whining. If you want to go outside, you prove you're the strong one. Then silence, then muffled breathing, then a name. Riley, take the red one, he's done. Roan froze. She rewound. Riley, take the red one, he's done. Her blood chilled. Riley was one of the missing children, 8 years old, a second grader, and the voice had just spoken to him like a subordinate. The next morning, Pike met her in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, thermos in hand, bags under his eyes. You look like hell, he muttered. I didn't sleep, she said, opening the cruiser's trunk, and neither will you once you hear this. They sat inside, and she played the recording again, this time pointing to the exact second the man spoke the line. When the tape ended, Pike stared at the dashboard for a long moment. You're saying one of the kids was helping him? I'm saying, Roan said carefully, that either Riley was being used to manipulate the others, or he'd already broken. Pike didn't speak. He'd seen too many cases where children had been conditioned to obey, even in the darkest circumstances. But 8 years old? That was too young to be anything other than terrified. Roan slid a folder across the console. I dug deeper into the school records, she said. Riley Foster had a scar. Small crescent on his jaw. Playground fall. But what's interesting is this. She pulled out a missing persons bulletin from 1976. Black and white, faded. Elijah Connors, age 9, went missing from an orchard town 2 counties over. Disappeared during apple season, no trace. She pointed to the photo. A boy with a narrow face, short brown hair, a tiny scar on his jaw. Same scar, Roan said. Same bone structure, 6 years ago. Pike blinked. You think Riley Foster was actually this boy? I think someone's taken children before and renamed them. At Briar Glen Orchard, the forensics team returned for a second search of the back field. The hatch had been sealed again temporarily, but now the entire area around it had been mapped, scanned, and sectioned off into quadrants. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a second anomaly. Pike stood by as the excavation team dug 6 feet down into a patch of earth that showed signs of being disturbed, though decades had passed. At a depth of 4 feet, the shovel struck something solid. By 6 feet, it was clear. A metal locker, industrial, dented, latched shut with 2 corroded padlocks. It took bolt cutters to get inside. Roan stood nearby, notebook in hand, bracing for what they might find. Pike lifted the lid slowly. Inside, a stack of children's clothing, folded neatly. A shoebox labeled Rewards. Dozens of paper strips, handwritten in different childlike scripts. Some read, I did good. No crying today. He let me eat first. At the bottom of the locker lay a Polaroid camera and a sealed manila envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 photographs, each one showing a child inside the storm shelter, sitting, standing, staring at the camera. And in all 3, a boy with a crescent scar stood just behind the others, expressionless, watching. Riley. Back at the sheriff's office, Roan met with Margaret Greer, Harper's foster mother. The woman clutched a tissue in one hand and Harper's school photo in the other. She was a quiet girl, Margaret said. Didn't make waves, didn't have friends, but she never caused problems. Did Harper ever mention someone named Riley? Roan asked gently. Margaret thought. She used to whisper that name at night. I'd check on her during storms and find her curled in bed, eyes open, whispering, "Tell Riley it's not my turn." I thought she was dreaming. Roan's heart sank. "Do you think," Margaret asked, "that she's still alive?" Roan didn't answer right away. "I think Harper was the one who tried to escape," she said softly, "and I think Riley stopped her." October 17th, 1982. Location: storm shelter, Briar Glen Orchard. The forensic techs worked in shifts now. Every inch of the underground chamber had been photographed, cataloged, and logged, but there were still pieces missing. Details too faint to capture on film. Details like the scratches on the far wall. Not the obvious ones. Not the children's names. The faint ones. Detective Sandra Roan stood with her gloves on, flashlight in hand, crouched in front of a section of concrete opposite the carved names. She had already seen Emma, Riley, Sean, Lila, Toby, etched in small, desperate letters, all grouped together. But directly across from them, almost hidden in shadow, was a single scratch mark that didn't look like the others. Just one name. Harper. But unlike the others, it wasn't etched straight. It was scratched over, half erased, like someone had started carving it and then stopped. Or been stopped. Roan turned to the technician beside her. "When did this one get logged?" The man looked over. "That? We almost missed it. Found it this morning under layers of grime. It was covered in soot or ash, maybe." Roan squinted. The scratch wasn't deep. More of a hesitation than a statement. But it was there. Uneven. Shaky. "Harper was here," Roan whispered. "She just never finished her name." She stood and backed up, taking in the room's dimensions again. 10 feet by 15. One ladder. No exit. The floor was uneven. Cement poured over dirt, patches sunken in. She walked the perimeter, careful not to disturb anything. That's when she noticed it. A small hatch in the far corner. Not a full door, just a cutout in the floor, square and shallow, like a root cellar within a root cellar. The bolts had been painted over. No one had noticed. Roan called it in. 2 hours later, Pike arrived with a crowbar and a team. The bolts cracked reluctantly. It took 3 men to lift the sub-panel. Inside, darkness, dry, shallow, maybe 4 feet deep. But even in the low light, Roan could see what was inside. A child's mattress, soiled, old, alone, and scratched into the concrete beside it. "I'm not in the club." Meanwhile, a mile away, a jogger on County Road 14 saw something strange in the ditch, half buried beneath a layer of wet leaves. She paused, pulled her earbuds out, and took a few steps back. It was a cassette tape, labeled in blocky handwriting, Day 8. She made noise again. "Riley says that means we lose dinner." She called the sheriff's office immediately. By sundown, Roan had the tape playing in her office. The same male voice. "We follow the rules or someone gets punished. That's the game. If Harper wants to leave, she has to finish the name." A faint sound followed, scratching maybe. A child's breathing. Then a thud. Then silence. Roan turned the tape off. The orchard closed permanently that week. The media circus had only intensified. Vermont's field trip horror, secret shelter, missing kids, new evidence. Audio tapes reveal child prison beneath orchard. Pike had been walking the perimeter when he found Mr. Barley again, seated by the chicken coop with a weathered thermos in his hand. "They're saying this is your fault," Pike said bluntly. Barley shook his head. "That shelter's older than me. You know how many things are buried under farmland like this? Prohibition tunnels, old septic tanks, things people didn't want found." Pike studied him. "You're saying you had no idea 6 kids went missing under your feet. I'm saying I didn't dig that hole. Then who did?" Barley finally looked up, eyes narrowing. "You ever hear the name Silas Lane?" Pike frowned. "Should I have? Used to live around here. way back. 1950s, worked orchards up north, then just vanished. But the stories? He lowered his voice. Said he liked to build things. Rooms underground. Places where kids could be taught not to scream. Urban legend, Pike muttered. Barley shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe Silas never left. That night, Roan reviewed the orchard's land deeds from town records. In 1959, a man named Silas Lane had purchased a half-acre on the northern ridge of the orchard. By 1972, the name was gone. Transferred, unsigned, no forwarding address. Roan flipped the folder closed. Somewhere beneath that orchard, long before 6 children ever stepped onto that field trip bus, someone had already laid the trap. October 18th, 1982. Location, Windham County Historical Society / Briar Glen Orchard, North Ridge. The town historian was not what Roan expected. Miss Adelaide Northcutt was in her 70s, wore thick glasses on a chain around her neck, and kept her files in a drawer labeled unsorted, untrustworthy. But when Roan asked about Silas Lane, the old woman didn't hesitate. "Oh, him," she said, pushing her glasses higher. "Strange man. Didn't speak to neighbors. Had a dog that barked all night. Wore gloves even in the summer. Bought the orchard ridge in '59. Said he wanted to grow northern spy apples." Roan raised an eyebrow. "Did he?" "Not a single tree. Just stayed in that crooked little house of his, hammering at night. They say he was a carpenter, but no one ever saw him work for pay." "You said they say. Who exactly?" Adelaide leaned closer. "People who remember the smell of burning hair." Roan blinked. "After he vanished, the orchard kids started calling that slope the Shed Hill. Claimed they saw red lights under the dirt. One boy, Jimmy Talcott, swore he heard voices coming up through the roots. He ran away. Swore Silas had helpers." "Helpers?" "Kids," Adelaide whispered. "Ones that didn't run." That same afternoon, a new search began on the northern ridge of Briar Glen Orchard, just beyond the back field, up a slope too steep for most of the original field trip route. Radar crews scanned the soil. Within hours, they found a line of shallow disturbances, straight as a ruler. Each was about 6 feet apart, narrow, elongated, graves. Deputy Pike stood silently beside Roan, hands in his coat pockets. "There are 12 of them," the radar tech said. "We've only exhumed the first 2, both empty, but something was buried here." A technician held up a sealed evidence bag. Inside, a thread of red yarn, tangled, weather-worn, faintly knotted at one end. "It was buried with a button," she added. "Cloth's gone, but the yarn's intact. Looks like part of a bracelet or maybe a string game." Roan turned pale. "That's what Emma wore," she said. "A red yarn bracelet. She was teaching the others cat's cradle on the bus." Back at the sheriff's office, the audio team recovered more from the cassette found in the ditch. The voice of the man again. "You boys are stronger. The girls forget the rules. Don't let them forget again." Then a child crying. Then something dragging. Then, if she scratches the full name, she leaves. If not, she stays. And at the very end, barely audible, a girl's voice. "I scratched it. I swear. Please, don't close the door." Roan pressed pause. Harper. That night, a new piece of evidence came in. A call from Briar Glen Elementary's janitor, who had turned in a small, long-forgotten, lost-and-found box retrieved from the gym's ceiling crawl space. It contained a folded paper labeled, "The Orchard Rules, Club Members Only." Inside, in a child's handwriting, "No crying, no telling, don't wake up the quiet boy. If you leave, leave alone." He hears scratching. "Don't say his name out loud, never touch the red thread, finish your carving, don't talk back to Riley. If the lights go out, lie still." Roan's hands trembled as she read. "Don't talk back to Riley," she repeated aloud. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a second in command. Pike stood behind her, staring over her shoulder. "No," he muttered. He was a survivor, turned enforcer. They returned to the orchard at sunrise. The radar pinged another anomaly, this time beneath a rusted wheelbarrow that had been untouched since the 1960s. Beneath it, partially buried, they found the warped remains of a wooden door sealed with tar. Inside, a room even smaller than the storm shelter. No bedding, no food. Just one chair, bolted to the floor, and red yarn coiled in a perfect circle beneath it, wrapped around a rusty nail. October 19th, 1982. Location: Windham County Evidence Lab, Greer Residence. The envelope was unmarked. No return address, no fingerprints on the paper. It had been left in the overnight drop box outside the sheriff's office sometime between midnight and dawn. Inside, one Polaroid photo, severely faded, edges warped from moisture, but the image was unmistakable. 6 children standing in a cramped concrete room. 2 sat cross-legged on the floor. 1 leaned against the far wall. 3 stood in the back, shoulders hunched, eyes locked on the lens. They were thin, dirty, barefoot, in the bottom right corner, barely visible in shaky pen. Day 5. Roan stared at the image beneath the sterile lights of the evidence lab. She picked up a magnifier and leaned closer. In the far right corner, a child stood with arms crossed, taller than the others. His eyes weren't wide with fear like the rest. They were focused, watching, calculating. Riley. To his left, seated on the floor, was Harper, and in her lap, a notebook. "Have we found that notebook?" Roan asked later that morning. The tech shook his head. "Not in the shelter. But if it's still out there, it could have been buried or hidden." Pike stepped into the room holding a fresh folder. "You'll want to see this," he said, laying it on the table. Forensics ran the red yarn for trace fibers. And it's not just yarn. It's been mixed with strands of hair. Human hair, from multiple sources. Girls only. Rowan recoiled slightly. He made them weave it? Maybe. Or maybe it was part of the club rules. Either way, it's not just decoration. That afternoon, Roan visited the Greer residence, Harper's home. Margaret Greer met her at the door with visible exhaustion in her posture. She hadn't slept since the orchard. "I need to see Harper's room," Roan said gently. Margaret nodded. The bedroom was quiet, neat, walls covered in pressed flowers, a few hand-drawn pictures tacked to corkboard. But it was the closet that caught Rowan's attention. On the inside of the door, drawn in dull pencil, was a rectangle, measured to look like a TV screen. Beneath it, stick figures, 1 standing, 4 sitting, 1 alone in a far corner, and a phrase, "He never blinks." Roan sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. "She remembered," she whispered, even if she couldn't say it out loud. Margaret walked in, holding something folded in a plastic grocery bag. "I found this in the attic last spring," she said. "Didn't think anything of it until now." She handed Roan the bag. Inside was a small cloth-bound notebook, pages torn at the edges, childish handwriting scrawled across every page. Roan opened it to the first entry. Day 1. "We were told to stop crying. Toby cried. Riley said not to look at him after. I think Sean is sick. His shirt has blood now. The man told us to name our corner. Mine is the door." Day 2. "We can't say the man's name, but he said he used to live here when the roots were smaller. He said it like a riddle. Emma still won't eat. Lila got punished." He watched us from the square hole in the ceiling. Roan turned the page to the final entry. It was shaky, ink smudged. Day ? I don't know how long it's been. I tried to finish carving my name. He said that means I could leave. But Riley looked at me different after that. I don't think he wants me to go. There's a second room. I heard him dragging something. I scratched it. I swear, please let me out. Roan sat back, pulse in her ears. Harper never came home, she said. Not really. Her body did, but she never made it back to the surface. She stared out the bedroom window at the fading fall light. We have 5 names carved into a wall, she said aloud. But we don't have 5 survivors, just 1. And she was still hiding. Back at the orchard, excavation on the northern ridge continued. At 6:42 p.m., a tech unearthed another door, wooden, latched shut, buried beneath nearly 40 years of roots. Inside the shallow crawl space was nothing but dirt walls, scratched plaster, and one final clue: a broken Polaroid camera. Still loaded. The last photo remained inside. Roan developed it on site. This time there were only 5 children in frame. Riley was not one of them. But behind them, just barely visible in the dark, beyond the edge of the concrete wall, stood a man's silhouette. No eyes, just the outline of gloves. And something in his hand. Red yarn. October 20th, 1982. Location: Windham County Sheriff's Office. Underground shelter. Final sweep. The air in the briefing room felt heavier than usual. Roan stood in front of the incident board, now cluttered with photos, maps, and printed stills from the recovered Polaroids. The latest image was pinned front and center. The 5 children huddled in the shelter, the man's silhouette looming just beyond the wall. We've confirmed the shelter had no external entry point beyond the ladder, she began, addressing the assembled team. There were no hinges or pressure seals, nothing mechanical. That means the man in this photo was already inside. She turned to Pike. Which makes the timeline impossible, he said grimly. Barley swore no one came or went during the trip. He was with Miss Corwin from 9 a.m. to noon. But that photo, taken around midday, judging by the light leak. Unless, Roan said, stepping forward, there was never a second man. The room quieted. She pointed to the name carved beneath the far mattress. I'm not in the club. Someone else was down there. Maybe before the children. Maybe long before. She held up the rules list again. Don't wake up the quiet boy. Don't say his name out loud. He hears scratching. If the lights go out, lie still. These weren't just instructions, she said. They were warnings. Meanwhile, the final sweep of the shelter revealed something the initial team had missed. Behind a loose panel in the concrete wall near the mattress chamber, a cadaver dog alerted. Roan and Pike descended as the techs opened the space. It wasn't a full tunnel, just a crawl space, 6 feet deep, barely lit. Inside, they found a wooden crate sealed with wire and masking tape. Roan's flashlight flickered as she stepped forward. The crate held 6 cloth dolls, hand-stitched, 1 for each child. The names were embroidered in red thread. Emma, Riley, Sean, Lila, Toby, Harper. All except Riley's were missing limbs. 1 had no head. 1 was torn through the chest. Only Riley's doll was untouched. Beneath the dolls lay a journal, leather-bound. Mice had chewed the corners, but most of the pages remained. Pike read over Roan's shoulder. Journal entry. October 3rd, 1982. The new batch came today. Loud at first. That will stop. I let Riley be the gatekeeper again. He watches well. Harper is clever. She knows the name. She won't say it. The red thread keeps the room balanced. When the circle breaks, the club resets. They brought the journal topside under full chain of custody protocol. Roan took the final page herself. It was dated the day before the children vanished. Journal entry, October 14th, 1982. We finish at dawn. 6 in, 5 stay. She scratched it, but not deep enough. He's still down there. He doesn't blink. He never left. Roan exhaled slowly. Who is he? She asked aloud. Pike looked away. Maybe not a name, maybe a role. She glanced at the rules list again. Don't wake the quiet boy. What if the quiet boy wasn't a child? Later that evening, Roan met with Miss Corwin at the hospital. The teacher had been released from observation but remained under sedation. Her eyes looked hollow, her voice barely audible. "They went in one at a time," she said. "He called their names, said it was a game, said the apples were only for winners." Roan leaned forward. "Who was he?" Corwin closed her eyes. "The one with the gloves. The voice like a whisper through walls." "Silas Lane." Corwin blinked. "Number the boy with the scar said he was dead. Said he left him behind." "Riley?" A nod. "He said he buried Silas in the far room. Said it was his turn now." The orchard was sealed off that night. The town demanded answers. News vans parked outside the sheriff's office. Journalists shouted about cults and mass graves. Families of the missing returned to stand by the caution tape, clutching photos and grief that had never aged. Inside the shelter, one final discovery was made: a handprint in dried blood, pressed against the ceiling above the mattress corner. Small, feminine. Next to it, scratched in fingernail. "I scratched it." "I scratched it." Roan stared up at it for a long time, breath caught in her chest. "She tried," she whispered. "She really tried." October 21st, 1982. Location: Windham County Foster System Archives, former Briar Glen Elementary Counselor's Office. The basement of the Windham County Administrative Building smelled like old ink and mildew. Detective Roan flipped through a stack of tattered manila folders marked Foster Intakes, 1977 to 1983. Each one bore the telltale stains of decades in a damp file room, the handwriting often illegible, the caseworkers long retired. She found Riley Foster's file wedged between two with no names, only intake numbers. The first red flag came immediately. Riley wasn't his birth name. The file listed him as Elias Jonah Keene, born April 2nd, 1974, removed from a rural foster home in Essex County in 1979 after an anonymous complaint. The caregiver's name had been blacked out, but a second note, faint and nearly erased, was scribbled on the side margin. Child shows signs of learned compliance. Wakes during fire drills, repeats phrases in mirror, obsessed with dirt. Rowan's stomach turned. A second intake sheet, dated 2 years later, showed Elias had been placed in a group home just 40 miles from Briar Glen. That home burned down in 1981. Cause: electrical. No injuries. One missing child: Elias. Next recorded appearance: September 1982. Enrolled as Riley Foster, 2nd grade, Briar Glen Elementary. No guardian signature, no vaccination forms. He had simply appeared. Roan returned to the school and met with the retired guidance counselor, Ms. Deborah Lynn. Lynn was in her 80s now, living in a quiet, assisted living home, her mind still sharp, her eyes troubled the moment she heard Riley's name. "He didn't behave like the other children," she said. "Didn't play, didn't run, didn't ask for help. He always sat in the corner during group exercises." "Did he ever speak about his past?" "No," Lynn said, "but he drew it, over and over. Same picture, a ladder going down, a room with no windows, stick figures in corners, and a red string above them like a halo." She sighed, then added, "He once asked if he'd scratched deep enough." Roan leaned forward. "Scratched what?" He didn't say, but he smiled afterward. First and last time I ever saw him smile. Pike met Roan back at the orchard just before sundown. "We traced the journal ink," he said. "It's a rare kind. Industrial. Only 2 local vendors ever stocked it. One was a general store in Essex County. Shut down in '83. Roan nodded. "Where Elias, was first placed," Pike continued. "We also matched soil samples from beneath the crate room, found traces of cadaverine." Roan blinked. Which means there was a body buried down there once. Probably long before the children, probably Silas Lane. She exhaled slowly, and Riley stayed with him, learned the rules, then rewrote them. The theory solidified. Riley, formerly Elias, had been taken or groomed by Silas Lane in the late 1970s, lived underground, conditioned. When the older man died, whether from age, violence, or illness, Riley remained behind. And when the opportunity came in 1982, he took over the club. But what Roan still couldn't understand was why Harper was allowed to leave, and why the others were not. That night, Roan sat alone in the evidence room, the 6 dolls from the crate laid out in a line on the table, each one mutilated except Riley's. She stared at Harper's, its stitched mouth partially ripped open, one hand torn loose, the red thread around its neck unraveling. In her notebook, Roan wrote, "Harper scratched her name. Was that the test?" Riley stopped her once, but something changed. Did she remind him of someone, a sister, a protector, or did he need someone left behind to remember? She flipped open Harper's old journal again, this time to a torn page at the back, folded and taped. A drawing. Stick figures again. This time, only 2 remained in the underground room. One child, one larger shadow. Above them, scribbled words in all caps. "I'm still here. He's still listening." Roan felt a chill crawl up her spine. If Riley was a vessel, an apprentice twisted by isolation, then who or what had taught him? Who had set the rules? And why did the red thread still appear in every hiding place? At 3:17 a.m., a call came in from the Orchard site security team. Motion sensors had gone off. Again. Roan raced to the scene. This time they caught it on the trail cam. A child-sized figure, barefoot, shirtless, standing beside the hatch in the dark, unmoving for over 11 minutes. Just standing, before turning and walking slowly back into the trees. October 22nd, 1982. Location, Briar Glen Orchard, North Ridge Excavation Zone. Dawn came gray and slow over Windham County, mist clinging low over the orchard's northern ridge. Detective Sandra Roan stood at the perimeter fence, her eyes locked on the spot where the trail cam image had been taken, just 12 hours earlier. A childlike figure, barefoot in the cold, had stood near the sealed hatch for nearly 11 minutes, never moving, never looking toward the camera. Now that patch of ground was roped off with fresh flagging tape. The team had been working non-stop through the night. They had finally found a second hatch, 20 yards north of the original shelter. Unlike the first, this one was flush with the forest floor, camouflaged beneath a tangle of moss and stone. It bore no visible lock, only a rusted steel handle and a faint symbol carved into the center, a circle with a line through it, intersecting 2 dots. Roan stared at it as the crew prepared to open the hatch. "It's not a logo," she muttered. "It's a map. That's the shelter, this is the door, and the 2 dots?" Pike stepped up beside her. Survivors? Or replacements? The hatch opened with a long groan. Inside, a spiral staircase descending into blackness. No ladder this time, no makeshift rebar steps. This had been constructed intentionally. Concrete spiral, reinforced beams, old industrial lighting along the wall. Whoever built this had time, Roan whispered. She clicked on her flashlight and descended first, her boots echoing as she spiraled downward. At the bottom, a hallway, clean, dry, lined with wooden doors, each numbered by hand. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3, up to Room 6. Each door had a viewing slit and a rope lock from the outside. Each room had a child's cot. Roan's pulse quickened. It wasn't a bunker, it was a facility. In Room 3, they found a stack of index cards, each labeled with a child's name and a list of traits. Lila resists verbal commands, draws flowers, threatens self-harm. Toby, compliant. Mimics Riley, does not cry. Emma, selectively mute. clings to Harper, afraid of dark. Sean, frequent nosebleeds, refuses food, has night terrors. Harper protects others, writes notes, asked about ladder. Riley listens well, watches from corner, does not blink. Room 6 was different. There was no cot, only a single chair in the center, bolted to the floor. A spotlight above. On the back wall, written in ash or blood or both. To leave, you must take someone else's place. Roan backed away. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a system. A journal was found in room 1, buried under a loose floor tile. Roan flipped through the brittle pages. One entry stopped her cold. Entry, undated. The orchard feeds them. The thread binds them. The man teaches the rules. But Riley? Riley remembers. He said the lights weren't for seeing, they were for watching. He told me Harper knew how to get out, but she wouldn't leave us behind, so he made her choose. I think she picked me. There was no signature, only a smeared thumbprint at the bottom, child-sized. By evening, the FBI had arrived. Forensics confirmed something horrifying. The walls of room 6 had been lined with human teeth, pressed flat into the mortar behind the paint. Nearly all were from children. Some dated back decades. Silas Lane had not started this in 1982. He had inherited it. Outside the orchard, the town began to fracture under the weight of the revelations. Old families whispered about orchard boys who never returned, about missing farmhands, about the summer of 1961 when the apples came in early, and no one ever said why. Back in the evidence lab, Roan stared at the dolls again. She pulled out Riley's, the only one that wasn't torn. She turned it over and found something tucked inside the stitching, a fragment of a photograph, just one corner. It showed part of a man's jaw, gloved hand raised mid-gesture, and beside him, in shadow, a 7th child, one who was never listed, one who was never carved into the wall. Roan closed her eyes. They had only ever been looking for 6, but there had been 7, and one of them had stayed to keep the door open. October 23rd, 1982. Location, Windham County Sheriff's Office, Briar Glen Orchard, sealed room 7. The doll had been carefully stitched shut. Forensics confirmed the thread wasn't just red yarn, but human hair woven into the fabric to match the others. And the photograph fragment it held? It had been torn deliberately, its edges singed, as if someone tried to destroy the rest. But there was no mistaking what it showed. A 7th child, face turned slightly, barely visible behind the silhouette of a gloved man. Roan sat alone in the sheriff's office, staring at the image under the magnifier. 7 in, she whispered, but we only ever knew 6 names. Across the room, Pike leaned against the filing cabinet, eyes bloodshot. Maybe that's why the math never worked, he said. 5 names on the wall. 1 survivor, 1 more erased. Or hidden, Roan added, buried in the system before it ever began. That same morning, excavation crews returned to the 2nd underground facility. A new anomaly had been found, a sealed alcove behind room 6, walled off with solid concrete. Ground-penetrating radar showed a void inside. It took 6 hours to breach it safely. Behind the wall was room 7, and room 7 wasn't like the others. It had no cot, no drawings, no light fixtures, just walls covered in scratches, countless gouges, some shallow, some deep. No names, no words, but one symbol repeated over and over, a circle, 2 dots, and a line through both. The same marking as the hatch, carved again and again, hundreds of times. In the center of the room was a child-sized chair, overturned and broken, and a mirror, shattered into 3 pieces. A faint handprint in the dust, child-sized. Roan knelt beside it and traced the shape. She never left, she murmured. They never let her. Back at the sheriff's office, Margaret Greer arrived unannounced. She held something tightly in her hands, a shoebox, aged and warped with water damage. "I found this yesterday," she said. "It was in the wall behind Harper's old dresser, nailed into the studs." Roan opened the box carefully. Inside, a red yarn bracelet, a crayon drawing of 6 stick figures around a square, and a folded note, scribbled in faint pencil. "Don't forget her." She scratched the name, but it wasn't hers. "The 7th didn't cry." Roan sat down hard, pulse in her ears. "She took someone else's place," she whispered. "That was the final rule." A forensic artist was brought in to reconstruct the torn photo using partial archive scans and digital recovery. The final image was clearer now. 7 children, the 7th standing apart. Not younger, older, long hair, eyes vacant, clothes that didn't match the others, a girl, possibly 10 or 11. The rest of the photo had been burned away, but what remained revealed enough. The 7th child was not part of the 1982 field trip. Rowan ran the photo through the missing persons database, and there it was. Greta Mae Winton, age 10, vanished 1979, Essex County, placed in foster care in 1978, reported ran away, case closed due to lack of evidence. No one ever searched the orchards. Roan returned to the orchard that evening, alone. She walked back to room 7 and sat in the doorway. The temperature dropped quickly down there. Still, soundless. She opened Harper's notebook to the final page and read again. "I scratched it, I swear. She told me to. But then she took my hand and said she was ready now. That I should go instead." Roan turned off her flashlight. She sat in the dark, listened. Somewhere far behind the walls, she thought she heard it. A scratch. One long, slow line across the concrete. Then silence. Then a whisper. Or maybe just breath. October 24th, 1982. Location, Briar Glen Orchard, sealed room 7/Windham County. The morning sun never reached this deep. Roan stood again in room 7, this time with a full team behind her. Floodlights cast stark beams against the scratched walls, illuminating symbols layered so thick they nearly overlapped. The forensic team moved in silence, reverent now, because they knew. This wasn't a room. It was a tomb. And not for the body of a child, but for her memory. Greta Mae Winton had lived down here, longer than any of them. Maybe even before Riley, before Elias Keene was ever dragged below. She had scratched the walls. She had waited. And when the others came in 1982, she taught them. Roan paced slowly to the far wall. One scratch ran longer than the rest, deeper. It wasn't random. It formed a doorway, drawn crudely but with intent. A rectangle with a handle. The words "she went through" were faintly etched above it. Roan whispered, "She traded places." Pike stepped beside her, holding the last page of the reconstructed journal. "He told us one of us could go if someone stayed. She didn't say goodbye, just took my hand and said she was done counting the days." By noon, Roan had gathered the families. What remained of them? She showed them the photograph, restored. All 7 children, the ones who were named, the one who was not. And she explained the truth. Greta had become part of the system Silas created, not by choice, but by survival. She learned the rules, obeyed them. And when the next children came, she gave them hope. By taking Harper's place, she let one child go free and stayed behind to keep the others from being chosen. A martyr, a ghost, a child lost before her time. Harper Greer returned to the orchard that same day. For the first time, she stepped into room 7. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She walked to the wall with a scratched doorway, placed her palm flat against it, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she pulled something from her pocket, a piece of red yarn. She tied it around one of the cracked concrete hooks on the wall, just a loop. Then turned and walked out. In the following weeks, the orchard was declared a crime scene of historical significance. The shelters were sealed. A memorial was built. 5 children had vanished in 1982. Only one survived. One had traded her name for freedom. One had kept the door shut behind her, and one had never been named at all. March 12, 2025. Location: Windham County Historical Society. The exhibit was quiet. Harper stood beneath the glass, older now, stronger, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached toward the display. Inside the case, 7 dolls, now cleaned and restored. Each had a name tag: Emma, Riley, Sean, Lila, Toby, Harper. And now, at the center, Greta. A placard beside her read, Greta May Winton, 1969 to 1982, the 7th child. Never reported found, never forgotten again. Harper stepped back, and from the speakers overhead, the audio loop began again. Day 1. Mr. Barley says we can't go outside until we stop crying. But now, for the first time, the voice that followed wasn't a child's. It was Greta's, software steady, clear. It's okay. I scratched it for you. You can go now. The screen faded to black,